We're here today to remember the life of Harold Myers, who passed away quietly in his sleep this week at the age of 99. Grandpa approached death the way he approached his life, calmly and with quiet strength. Harold was born in 1920 on a small farm near Devil's Lake, North Dakota. Working on the farm made Harold strong physically, too. He even helped me move from my apartment to apartment during college and drove a trailer of my stuff down to Minneapolis for my move there, even though he was 80 at the time. And I didn't think twice when he carried the heaviest boxes from the car to the elevator and into my 16th floor apartment. It was only later when my dad reminded me that Harold was getting old and maybe I should have suggested that he takes things a bit slower. I just looked at him with incomprehension. What? Grandpa's the strongest person I know. He can do anything. Forever, right? Harold met Irma when he was 18. She was from a neighboring small town and the smartest girl from anywhere around. She had actually gone to a year of college, and in North Dakota that was something at that time. And she was home to spend time with her family. Harold had been drafted, and thinking he was off to World War II, and I think also knowing not to let such a determined and pretty young woman get away, he proposed to her quickly. Whether they would have gotten married without the intensity of wartime pressuring them both toward decisiveness, it's hard to say. I know Harold was in love with Irma all the days of his life, no matter what she said or did. And when she passed away, he talked about her all the time and missed her dearly. Harold as a dad was easygoing and enjoyed the small things in life. Baseball on the radio, westerns, and making and eating homemade fudge every Friday night. His girls tell the story of the time he put the fudge outside the window to cool, and like owies, and a cat came by and ate it. And he was undeterred, even though they probably didn't have the money for the extra cocoa and butter and sugar. He made another batch immediately. He understood how important the ritual was for them. And he and Irma tried to make ends meet with 5 children, having pancakes on Friday night before they did the next week's shopping. Eventually, Harold was able to join the sheep mill union and move from Fargo to East Grand Forks, buying a lot just outside of town in East Grand Forks by the river and building a house, doing all the work himself with his own hands, while he, Irma, and Glenn lived in the basement. Harold, Grandpa Myers as I knew him, was even more easygoing when his grandchildren came to visit in this house. He disappeared into his garage, stoked up the pot-bellied stove to warm it up, and used his woodworking equipment, creating step stools, shelves, and so many other shapes with his jigsaw, whatever his daughters brought him, which they would later paint as craft projects. He even made us card holders so that we could play the game hand and foot before our hands were even big enough to hold 11 cards. Grandpa also tilled his large garden, always believing that you planted potatoes on Good Friday. He loved reading westerns. He had quite a few, but many didn't survive the flood in '97. When Grandpa moved to Crookston at age 80, he began checking out the Louis L'Amour books from the library a few at a time. He even secretly wrote his initials in the cover of each one before he returned them. And at one point, the librarian let him know with a wink that she was on to his secret, and he didn't care. He just kept it up until he had read them all. Grandpa loved showing off his small collection of cuckoo clocks, including a glockenspiel that played music while little German figures danced and spun. He would bring us over and adjust the hands of the clock, spinning them until the hour so that we could witness the show. Grandpa loved things like that. When we were little, we'd arrived at Grandpa and Grandma's house in East Grand Forks, and we would argue about who got to push the doorbell. And then we would run in to hear which of its many tunes were playing. And Grandpa would encourage us to run out and push it again and again to hear them all. He never seemed to tire of hearing them, although he might have been a good pretender. Arriving at Grandpa's house, the greeting from him was always a huge bear hug, saying our name over and over again. He'd say, "Oh, Polly, 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 you're here." And Grandpa shared his love for us openly and easily, and always made each of us feel special. Even when it was more difficult for Grandpa to stand up out of his chair, he'd still call us over for a hug. I never doubted that I was loved. That positive outlook, support, and great love was Grandpa's gifts to each of us, all of his 5 children, 7 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren. And of course, for most of his life until the last decade and a half, his beloved wife Irma. think Grandpa would also want us to mention that he visited the 47 of the 48 contiguous states, driving Ecolab trucks thousands and thousands of miles until he was well into his mid-80s. Even after he retired from the work, he loved to tell us about his adventures. He would bring out his atlas and point to all the pickup and drop-off points, tracing the highways with the unshaking fingers of his huge hands. I'd like to end with some words of Western wisdom by Louis L'Amour that describe perfectly what was special about the way Grandpa lived. Grandpa didn't spend his life wanting what he didn't have. He spent his time enjoying the many gifts he had been given. He spent time enjoying his hobbies and his grandchildren and later great-grandchildren. The trail is the thing, not the end of the trail. Travel too fast and you miss all that you are traveling for. Louis L'Amour.